Enjoy a seat at the table and good company, where great conversations and meaningful discussions happen.
Welcome to And Good Company. I'm Sarah Fiedelholtz. We all know a great dinner party isn't really about the food. It's about the people seated around the table, engaging in lively discussions. And Good Company gives you the opportunity to enjoy a seat at the table for smart and important conversations as they happen. I am pleased to be in the company of Mitch Stein, the founder and Chief Impact Officer of The Pond. Welcome.
Thanks for having me.
So first, let's talk a little bit about your background and who you are, and then we'll get into this very new entity that you have literally just launched called The Pond. So tell me a little bit about your background, and you have a strong background in business, right?
Yeah. So I'll start off saying, Mitch, my pronouns are he, him. I'm gay. I'm anti-racist. Those are two things I try to start every conversation with, to just make that front and center in everybody's minds as something we can be holding in any space, in any conversation. I grew up in Fort Wayne, born and raised here. My dad's a doctor locally. I went to Canterbury from when I was first in school till I graduated. I went to the University of Pennsylvania, the Wharton School of Business. I was a finance and accounting major. When I was a sophomore, I got the opportunity to intern at Goldman Sachs, then did another internship, and then started working there. I was there for 7 years. In investment banking years, that's like a lifetime.
Yeah, because most right out of college, you go for 2 years, and then you're going to business school, yeah.
And honestly, I started, once I started full-time, I was in this group. I wanted to be a healthcare banker. My dad was a doctor, and my mom was a nurse. My sister's a nurse anesthetist here locally as well. And I was like, I'm healthcare through and through. I just hate blood, so I don't really want to practice medicine, but the business side is really interesting. And I got a call like a week before my internship was going to start that was like, you are working in the investment grade capital markets desk covering the natural resources sector. And I literally responded to the recruiter and said, what are investment grade capital markets and what are natural resources? And so it really wasn't by choice. I ended up covering a lot of like oil and gas, power and utility businesses, pipeline companies. But I will say, being the first year analyst that covered debt for power and utility businesses, it was not a sexy job. It was not something really anybody cared about. And so because of that, 3 months onto the job, I was flying around the country going to talk to treasurers and ATs at these, they're important companies, even if it's a power and utility, it may not be Apple.
Well, look what happened in Texas, so yeah, they're very important.
Unbelievably important. So I just got this amazing exposure to being the one at the table presenting, and it didn't matter that what I was presenting wasn't like the sexiest thing ever, because it mattered to that person.
Well, it mattered to them because it was their livelihood, their industry,
And so I think I learned that respect at a very young age, to not just think like, oh, this isn't on the cover of the Wall Street Journal every day, so like, why do I care? And I took that really seriously. And then senior people internally started to really recognize, oh, Mitch is the person you go to with any question about that topic. And so just being able to own that topic.
So you recognize the value of being an expert.
Mm-hmm. And an empathetic expert.
Okay.
And with that, I just think I got so many reps, a lot of visibility internally. I ended up having the opportunity to, after 4 years of working on that team, which was like way too long, I had the opportunity to go work directly for the CEO of the entire firm.
So you were in New York City then also, and you're talking about in the I'm just putting this in context for everybody. So you were in the most competitive, cutthroat industry there is, in one of the most competitive, cutthroat cities in the world. So, I mean, the intensity of this job, I mean, this is all consuming.
Yeah. I lived a couple blocks from work. I got reprimanded for being more than 5 minutes late to respond to an email. I was asked to step out of my grandfather's funeral to hop on a conference call. It's intense.
Right. So you got the opportunity then to work directly for the CEO. And who was that?
Lloyd Blankfein.
Okay.
And it was a total aberration. It was not finance related. It was all, caring for his schedule and his time, and being the connection between him and the rest of the business.
So really like his chief of staff.
He had a chief of staff, but he was very, very senior. He was a partner that ran the management committee, and but it was just me and then him for the most part. So like there was this huge middle ground, again, for me to step into and be kind of the empathetic expert, because I then called the partner who ran the business in Germany and was able to say, like, what's important to you right now? Who are the important clients? What can Lloyd do over email, over phone? When should he come there? And then I'd present that to Lloyd and say, you need to go to Germany and to the Netherlands in April because this conference, and you're going to see these 4 clients with these 3 business objectives. And he'd, okay. And that was like it was very cool to have that, start to feel that kind of power and responsibility at the same time. And by the end of that job, Lloyd, we had like an exit interview. And
now what made you decide to leave? Was there...
He retired.
The
job ended.
Okay, so it was a natural ending because he retired.
Yeah, so he retired. The incoming CEO had his own team, so I was asked to find a new position within the firm.
Before you tell me about the exit interview, let me ask you, because you really were privy to something that very, very few people are privy to, which is this inner sanctum of one of the most powerful CEOs, and in terms of a direct influencer of the capital system in America. What was that like to see? What do you think are the skills and talents that he had that you think made him successful? And what did you learn about when you become, because some people dream of being that CEO. What did you learn about what happens to him, that person, when they step into that role? Like, is their time so managed? Are they, is it like a celebrity that you're just so insulated? Tell me about those 2 things.
Yeah, I would say in terms of skills, what I saw make Lloyd great and other leaders, because that's the other thing about Goldman is it's not just CEO, you've got hundreds of partners who are all phenomenal leaders and talented people in their own right. It was the more he leaned into being himself was when he was most successful, most relatable. I think Goldman went through a bit of their own crisis after the financial crisis.
In 2008.
In 2008 and 2009, where they were seen as like, they were fine, they were profitable, everyone was getting paid, and yet the whole country was suffering. And they thought that they had separation from that because they were a bank to the wealthy and the big and powerful. And it's like, it doesn't matter if Main Street not your customer. You're part of a system and responsible for everybody.
And they were seen part of that this time around too with COVID. That they're making unbelievable money. And plus, what people also see is how much the bonuses are and how much those CEOs make. And between that gap between Wall Street and Main Street. Yeah,
and so I think he learned that lesson over and over again, that he grew up in subsidized housing in East New York. He told his stories about how growing up, the only person he knew in his entire life that wore a suit was his rabbi. And he got closer to him because he loved talking to him. He was really smart and he really loved history, and he would recommend books. And Lloyd spent more time at the Jewish Community Center in his neighborhood. His parents very much working class, making ends meet. He didn't know anyone that went to college in his entire life, which is just like hard for so many of us to even imagine. So it wasn't even like, which college am I going to go to, or should I go to college? It just didn't even cross his mind. And so getting closer with his rabbi, he ended up applying to Harvard and got into Harvard, and then a lot of the rest is history. But I think the more he leaned into that humility, that's what people loved about him, was his sense of humor and his humility and your empathy for others that comes with that sort of background where that's so different than most of the other people he worked with.
So he wasn't impressed or impacted by the trappings of, what he could afford and how he could live.
Yeah, and I think that was the most important lesson for me, was people are at their best when they're being themselves. And any effort to be something different is only going to be at your own detriment, even if you're fitting better into someone else's box. And I would say in his role at leading the firm, I think, is it isolating? Does he have like lots of support? He honestly was pretty low maintenance. Like he didn't like to travel with a bunch of people. There's plenty of CEOs who have full teams that are doing every little thing, and that definitely wasn't him. But the people who were supporting him, he really appreciated, and he really leveraged and understood why. Right? It's not like I'm just more important than you, or I'm more powerful than you. So like do as I say. It was like, no, you're going to help me because I can't do it all.
Right. So the importance of building a team, right? That so really and that loyalty to both for them to him and him to them.
Yeah.
Okay. So now let's go to the exit interview.
So I had a new job lined up. I was taking a few weeks off to go travel for a bit. And so we did this kind of exit interview, and he was like, what did you think? What did you think about the job? And I looked at him and I said, the most important takeaway for me was that I think I can do your job. He basically had the same reaction as you. And he just sort of like chuckled and nodded for a little bit. And I, of course, had to like jump in, and I was like, I don't mean right now.
Right.
And I don't even mean like maybe not even at Goldman Sachs.
Right.
But I've seen you as a human being, and 99% of this company never meets you. So
what was it that you felt, what aspect or what was it about that you felt you could do?
I could be myself.
Okay. So were you saying that were you ultimately saying that you could be successful at anything you chose to do because you saw that, or?
As long as it stayed true to who I was.
So the authenticity.
Authenticity, and inspiring others with my own authenticity.
So what did he say about?
He just sort of chuckled, and he's not, he doesn't talk a lot, is the other thing, is like what you get from him is really powerful.
Well, that's like, he probably learned that from the rabbi, because a lot of that is if you don't have, anything something smart to say, you just don't say anything. Yeah. So did he give you any words of wisdom or like anything so meaningful that like the Yoda that set you on this path, or?
No, I mean, I think it was more like, you're going to be, I agree, you're going to be successful at whatever, you just make sure you love it.
Well, so you have to define your definition of successful.
Yeah.
Because it may be different. I mean, certainly on Wall Street, the world you came from, it was all about your bank account.
Exactly.
There was not the emotional investment. I mean, putting money in that bank account, that didn't matter because they did, things at all costs. So.
Yeah, I think that is when you mention Wall Street, I agree, but I think that's way bigger than Wall Street.
Oh, no. It's all across the board. I mean, it's when we talk in higher education, when everybody at school is only talking about getting a job and how much they can make and not going to school just for the sake of an education. But I digress. So, okay. So he thought you would be successful and make sure you love it. Okay. So you had this job lined up, right? Mm-hmm. So at that point, did you start questioning, like, what is it that you love, or what is it you want to do? And, so what did that mean for you when he said that to you?
No, at the time, I was going into work in our technology investment banking practice.
So you were staying with Goldman?
Yes.
Okay.
I was going to work in mergers and acquisitions, IPOs it's called TMT, Technology, Media, and Telecom. When you talk about the most cutthroat, most competitive firm, this was the most competitive, most cutthroat group.
This is the group that gets the ink on the front page of the wall, like you talked about your first group. This is the group that every media, everybody is talking about. Yeah.
And I thought, no, I care about technology, and this is way more interesting to me. So I'm going to be doing something I really care about, and for the most important people at the firm, the people that everyone listens to, because they cover the most important clients.
Right.
And I jumped into that, and basically a month into the job, I was covering this auto marketplace business. And I was fascinated. I loved the concept of a company that was being kind of subversive in taking on how like big intermediaries, like car dealers, kind of own a market and prevent maybe consumers from having total transparency.
Is that something like Carvana?
Yeah, so something like that.
Okay, but I'm going to stop you a second because in your own entity you use this word subversive.
Yeah.
And in some ways I think it has a very negative kind of, so I want to understand, what do you mean by subversive?
Yeah. I mean, there are me opening this conversation saying I'm gay
Okay.
is subversive.
Why?
Because it's unexpected, it's bold, it is kind of questioning a existing power structure, saying I'm anti-racist. Those types of things to me are subversive just in being. And I hear really inspirational people, someone who's a black woman, a black queer woman saying I'm subversive by existing because I don't fit into the norm.
But subversive, that is not by the true definition of subversive. I mean, it is a subtle way of sort of making points, or, it's not this bold statement. So I would think it's more that you're being more disruptive and challenging the status quo than I would say subversive. Because subversive is done in subtlety, it's done in sort of propaganda. It's not so necessarily this positive. So I would say, just because obviously words are important to me, so I would challenge you on that one. So you were looking at this auto company that was a disruptor, okay, or challenging the status quo of how people would typically purchase cars. Okay.
Right. And there's something that by showing you can give consumers more information, more transparency.
Isn't that like Carfax?
Yeah.
Or Carfax?
Yeah. So, just put yourself 30 years ago and how people used to shop for cars.
Oh no, it was terrible, and women couldn't go by themselves, and then because they showed, and you didn't know, what actually the price was, and that was when I think it was Lee Iacocca who started this idea when they started. Saturn was the first company that the price was the price. What was on that sticker was the price for everybody, and you didn't feel like you had to negotiate. And did I get a good deal? And so that was the start of that. But you couldn't compare, just like you can't, look back at healthcare. What one procedure costs at one hospital versus another. You couldn't compare. Now, because of technology, you can compare those things. So it does, by nature, technology in some ways makes things more transparent.
Yeah. If you use it right.
Right. Okay.
But I think that's an amazing example where Saturn did something, but they couldn't change the whole market by themselves.
No, because they didn't have something like a global technology that, when you think about why the internet, the World Wide Web, not the internet, the World Wide Web, why it was originally created, it was by scientists so that they could share information and studies and results that would help to progress humankind and treatments and things. And that's also why when everybody looks at this idea that getting people to pay for things, it wasn't built that way. It was built to be this free exchange of information. So if you think about that changes how people really would look at it. But they didn't have that at that time. No. So it was really only once we have a lot of things now today we couldn't do even 30 years ago or even 20 years ago because we didn't have the technology.
Right.
Right.
And what was fascinating to me, like you just mentioned, it's not just cars, right? It's the same thing repeated over in so many different markets, and all these successful marketplaces took on those existing power structures to basically show any one individual provider, like, when you're playing a finite game, when you're playing the game of your own business, how can I get more money out of each of these customers? I might hide a little information, I might be a little bit aggressive in my sales tactics because it works for each of those sales. But you don't have the ability to appreciate how that affects the overall pie in keeping the market small. And so these marketplaces, a lot of people have referred to them as gateway marketplaces. They make it inviting for the customer and focus on the customer experience, even if the seller is the one kind of paying for that marketplace to exist.
So what you're saying is, I'm going to keep with my Carvana, which changed, and they deliver the car to you, and they even have those car vending machines. So you're saying that, Carvana says that they're going to be upfront, and they're going to make this a great experience, or even Carfax, right? But you're talking about regardless of the fact that who owns Carvana or who's behind Carvana, which is ultimately the big three or something like that. Is that what you're saying?
It is an intermediary that is really geared towards the consumer,
right?
As opposed to like playing to anyone like Ford, GM, Toyota.
So is that okay? So let's look at like Coca-Cola. They own all of these small drink brands, right? That people think are grassroots and small, and they were built by a guy in his garage. But in truth, they are actually owned, and they keep that mystique to it. But they're actually owned by the behemoth Coca-Cola.
Yeah.
So is that what you're saying?
Well, no, because the difference there is that would be like if Coca-Cola owned the grocery stores where they sold those products, as opposed to so it's a distribution, and having that marketplace be the distribution channel, as opposed to you driving to the dealer where that person kind of like then owns your time and your space.
Okay.
And now this is extremely distributed and extremely.
So meaning you don't have to go there. You can just you can see the prices from all over the country and everything. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I was recognizing, I thought this was so cool, like how you were able to use technology to benefit kind of the masses, if you will, and also create a better market, right? Because now, if you think about TripAdvisor, the value of that to airlines, hotel companies, tour companies, versus going through individual travel agents 30 years ago is massive.
Right.
So for me, it checked these two boxes that have always been really important to me of helping people, but also like understanding value and like creating a business and not making it something like charitable. And so I saw these examples over and over again.
But they weren't always good because these algorithms and things allows the hotels and especially the airlines, like if you go on at noon on Tuesday, you'll get one price of ticket, but if you go on at Tuesday at 2:00, you're going to get a different price. I mean, so then they start playing with this. So when you think about that, it's really benefiting the consumer. In some ways it is, and in some ways it isn't, because they've learned how to manipulate it.
Yeah, I mean, definitely none of those things are perfect.
Right.
I think it was, for me, I'm definitely an ideas person, and I think that's why like this conversation is great, because you are really holding me accountable to each word I use, which I love, because sometimes it's easy to like get in your own mind and thinking big ideas.
Well, I'm having just asking the question because I'm trying to understand, and then because I think that these things that you're saying about value and people's time, because you believe in the idea that we all do, that is the one universal thing that we all have, and we only have a limited amount of it each day, and nobody has more time than anybody else. It's just how people maybe use their time better.
Yeah.
So you were recognizing that this was this way that you could create value and you could create direct communication with the end user or customer.
Yeah.
Okay.
And that theory of actually by focusing more on the consumer and benefiting the consumer, even if I'm doing perfectly, if I'm taking steps in that direction, I'm creating more value for the broader market. And so,
how is that?
By growing the pie. More consumers are there, more of them are shopping, they're more active. So that becomes a better market for everybody that wants to sell into it, because I've done the work to earn trust and bring more people here.
So basically what you're ultimately saying is that you have created a qualified, quantifiable population of good leads, in a sense, or good consumers, or you really identify, like when people talk about in real estate, the looky-loos versus the real buyers.
Yeah.
Okay, so you have found that when you identify that these, where a company or entity creates a sense of value, transparency, good communication, that's what that's what appeals to these quality consumers?
Right.
Okay.
And they sort of make this experience less scary, right? I mean, you talked about being a woman, you felt like you couldn't go shopping for a car.
No.
So it was intimidating, right? And so it makes it welcoming, inviting.
I don't know if it was intimidating, it was just that you felt that they wouldn't give you as good a deal. They thought you weren't as smart to know, to negotiate.
Right. And so that experience working, it was from right there, like a month into my new job, that I knew I wanted to start a business.
Okay.
And I first went down this path that was internal at Goldman. They have this entrepreneur program. So you can like pitch an idea and you can put a team together and then you'll pitch it to like investment committee. And I could go make that my new job. And like we said,
That's a good gig.
And yeah, I was really excited about it. I mean,
you're building a business within,
Yeah, you don't get any equity though.
Right. Oh, right. Okay.
But no, I mean, I thought the exact same way, and also I kind of like bled Goldman blue, right? I had worked for the CEO, and what Lloyd said to me about kind of like doing what you love really rang true with me, and haven't gotten into this yet, but outside of work, I was getting really, really deeply involved in the nonprofit sector.
Right. And you're also were very involved with the LGBTQ community, right?
Yeah, so I'm on the board at the LGBT Center in New York. My dad and I have done a tremendous amount of fundraising for their event, the Northeast AIDS Ride, which is a bike ride from Boston to New York. Over the past 5 years, we've raised over $400,000 for the organization.
Wow, that's great.
In grassroots individual giving. And so those things were heavy in my mind, thinking about, well, what do I really love and what am I really good at?
And I'm going to stop you again first, ask you a question. Because, when you look at Wall Street and you look at who is on Wall Street, okay, there is not a lot of diversity and inclusivity. I mean, it's a very, you talk about, there's a direct funnel of who, and when you look at Wall Streeters, and there's not necessarily a lot of tolerance for those who are not similar to them. So how did that make you feel? Because clearly, I don't know if when you started at Goldman, if you were as direct and forthright with letting people know that you're gay, or was it that you felt you couldn't be that honest about who you were, and therefore that also influenced your decisions? I'm just wondering, because clearly now it is a very important part of who you are, and you identify with that, and that was one of the things that you immediately chose to tell about yourself. So has that changed?
So I came out right after I graduated from college. So I had done an internship for Goldman while I was still in the closet, dating a woman. The partner who ran the group that I was working in was a lesbian. Very bold, loud about it, made no qualms about it. Lloyd Blankfein was the very first CEO in the country to come out and make a public statement in support of marriage equality. The CFO of the firm was a gay man. Those things, as an intern, spoke so loudly to me, I think pretty subconsciously, of why I felt more comfortable there, even before I was like totally in tune with myself.
Right.
And so when I started coming out at work, people had these like ally tags on their computers, like it's literally sitting on top of their desk.
What's an ally tag?
Like it said ally and it had like the pride flag on it.
Oh. Now what is the that you are identifying what you
are
align
an
yourself,
ally to
so
the
like what you
LGBT
would support. So yours would be like ally LGBT, ally anti-racist.
Yeah.
It's like those strength finders where people, when they list what their 5 strength finders are, and everybody puts that on their name tag on their cubicle.
Yeah.
So now we all have to have our allies. Okay.
I mean, here's why. I was someone that I could go talk to and ask how I start doing this.
Right.
And then they were, able to say like, well, you should just go talk to Susie, who was the woman that ran our group. And so I put time on her calendar, and I was kind of waiting to tell anyone else till I could talk to her. And as is very common at Goldman with senior people, my meeting got moved like 8 times over the course of like 6 weeks for me, like waiting to come out. And then I met with her and told her, and she obviously was just like really excited, and she like immediately emailed the guy who runs the global like firm-wide LGBT network, who sat on our floor, and like before I even got back to my desk, he already like got an email from her. That guy's name is Johan Schudlik. He's now the CEO and CFO of Pond. So it's that starts to show you how why I think I stayed in positions much longer than normal there.
So you also brought him along. Did he leave Goldman before too? And he
left Goldman I think 4 or 5 years ago. Okay. So it was, but those bonds of who you worked with in those situations too also don't go away very quickly.
Right. Well, certain bonds, but yeah. Okay. So clearly, and also you probably saw that even 20 years ago, what you experienced at Goldman, that wasn't the Goldman that I knew. I mean, and I lived in New York when I graduated in '89. So that the Goldman I experienced, and that's not. So even what you see, the progression that they've made is really good, great, but there's still a lot obviously to go.
Yeah, and
So
I think honestly Lloyd is a huge credit to that.
Yeah.
I think even Susie or Marty, who was the gay CFO I mentioned, their stories in the early 2000s or 90s. Marty was the first person to come out at Goldman Sachs in 1995 globally. Tens of thousands of people that worked there. And that level of like boldness to me is just really inspiring, and that those stories were reiterated and reverberated 20, 25 years later was really
But think
important.
about that, it took till 1995 for that to happen.
Totally.
Okay, so I don't want to talk because I want to get to Pod.
Yes.
Okay,
Sorry.
so you were working in this group, and then you start to think about wanting to start something, and you were getting involved with nonprofits, and then what?
So I noticed that I was covering technology businesses, and then I looked at nonprofit organizations, and people just accepted that they had crappy tools. Like they were just like, yeah, I work in a nonprofit, so like our tech sucks. We're like kind of 10 to 15 years behind.
Well, because it's sort of the idea that they are investing in the work they do, not in the operations of what they do. So, I mean, that's also the issue where a lot of people then would argue, especially millennials, that they don't want to give to nonprofits where, 80% of the money goes to the administration of the nonprofit versus the work that they do. So, okay, so some of it's not like they're not wearing a badge of honor that says we don't have the best technology. It's sort of because where they choose to also put the money, right?
It's a big topic.
Okay.
So there's this, I hear the concern that people have that they're like, well, I'm giving my money away, so I want to make sure that it's being used wisely.
Right.
And so they come up with hardline tests to ensure that. So it's commonly referred to as like an overhead percentage.
Right.
So on an annual basis, that nonprofit is judged by 20, 30%, whatever their threshold is.
It really shouldn't be like 20%, right?
So people say you shouldn't be spending more than 20% on overhead. 80% of this money should be going to your programs.
Right.
The bright line binaries of that are incredibly problematic.
Okay.
Even with the best intentions,
Okay.
and implementation cause a lot of issues.
Okay.
So if you're an executive director who relies upon the largesse and charity of others, by and large. I mean, there are nonprofits who have business lines, but by and large,
but most they don't.
You're relying on gifts. You're relying on charity.
And most of them cannot get grants for operational expenses. I mean, they cannot get grants for like rent, equipment, right? So even when they raise money, that money cannot be used for the operational expenses. Okay.
So you get 20% of your budget can go to overhead.
Okay.
So
and majority of that goes to employees, not the actual people.
Staff.
And space,
your building,
right.
your utilities, your supplies.
Right.
And
then maybe your technology.
Right. How much is left over for technology?
Right. And technology also changes so fast that it's so hard to,
So the reality is, no matter the size of the nonprofit, the average percentage spent on technology is between 1% and 2%.
Okay. Per year.
Per year.
Okay.
Or per budget.
Okay.
It's 1% of their budget. The fact that doesn't deviate between size or life stage of an organization is very telling about the impacts of bright line binary requirements. Because if you're a brand new organization, don't you think you need to invest a little bit in infrastructure that you can deliver more impact? Right. And if you're bigger, later stage, probably are getting some economies of scale to not be. If you compare that to a business, we give companies money for a period of time to lose money. Like you expect them, we invest in a company for its first 5 years to not make $1 in profit.
Well, now it's a little less than 5, but okay, yeah.
There are different ways to invest and different ways to grow business, but by and large, you have to invest. You have to invest in your infrastructure, you have to invest in your team. What is more important than your systems and your team to deliver ultimately what you want to do?
Right.
And so for us to say like, well, yeah, but nonprofits don't know how to do that. I can't trust them. I can't trust that nonprofit to invest as a business so that long term they're maximizing their impact. And by the way, their impact is so much more complicated and complex and requires more time than most business objectives.
So what you're basically saying is we need to look at, which is what I have always said, nonprofits as businesses. And even though they can't take out the profits of the company, they invest them back into the nonprofit. And really being a nonprofit, really the only standards that make it different from a regular business is for the IRS. It's for tax implications. It has nothing to do with how they administer what they do, how they provide their product or goods or services. It really has, and so what you're saying is that you're looking at it from the idea that they're businesses.
Yeah.
And just because they don't make a profit, it doesn't mean they don't make a profit. It means they can't extract it out, but they're businesses.
Yeah.
Okay, so you're saying that we need to look at nonprofits as businesses, and we need to invest and give them time to grow and formulate their services and mission, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
And so I think that's what I wanted to bring about with that same marketplace structure that helps sell more cars.
Okay.
Could I create a similar marketplace structure that helps sell the right tools and technology to nonprofits?
Okay.
It was a banking product that worked well with their technology that was dedicated to nonprofits.
Right.
And so could we use like the finance arm to kind of like move folks forward on the technology side? We did really well in that contest. There were like 1,000 submissions. We were to the final 8. We did a week-long offsite with McKinsey, which is a big global consulting firm. And then we got to pitch to our firm-wide investment committee and all the head honchos. And we didn't get funded.
Okay. And did they tell you why?
It was a lot of, I would say some politics probably came up. I think it was just like, felt like it was a leap of faith as to how that became a real business line.
Right, I was just wondering because I think sometimes, that's the do-gooder, and it doesn't have that, that idea of a hard business and, the perceptions and biases of that. So
yeah, I mean, I think Goldman is a leader in so many ways on Wall Street, just like the LGBT issue, but in so many issues, they just announced like $1 billion plan around Black women-owned businesses. So you can take your qualms. You can take your qualms.
But it's also to make sure that really gets into the hands of who it should.
Yes.
But okay, but let's focus. So you didn't get funded, and so then what?
I cried. I was sitting in a meeting with our advisor for the program, literally like this far apart in a table, and she told me we weren't getting funded, and I just started sobbing.
Because you really invested.
And I totally saw myself doing that and not my current job, which I had grown to really dislike.
Okay.
I was working till 3 or 4 in the morning and doing this in my spare time. I felt like I was kind of sacrificing my personal relationships. I mean, at that point too, I think when you're 22 and doing that, but at that point I was 28, almost 29, you just start to feel like, is this going to be the rest of my life?
Right, you're evaluating, yeah.
And so it just sort of like all hit me at that moment. And I had never cried at work before, ever. And I just was sobbing, crying. And that literally the next day I left for Cycle for the Cause.
Okay.
Our 4-day bike ride from Boston to New York with my dad and my community. And I just think the totality of that weekend, I was just like, I got to go do this. And I don't know what it is going to be or exactly what that looks like, but I made a plan. I was like, the first week of March 2020, I'm going to leave and I'm going to, take the next few months to figure out what that means. And I had like 2 folks on my team who were going to leave with me. So I had co-founders. February, both those people ended up leaving Goldman and got other jobs and kind of left me. And I'm like, nope. End of February, I put in my 2 weeks notice and walked out the door on March 6th, throwing a little like parade for myself. I had 2 partnerships lined up, one with UNICEF, who was going to let me sit in on their own tech vendor evaluation so I could meet some of the providers in the space. Another was an organization called Youth Inc., who is a network of 80 nonprofits in New York City who wanted me to work in their office and demo what you're building with our members. And I left to go on vacation on March 12th. I flew from New York. My first stop was in Miami, and then I was going to Central America for 6 weeks. And I landed, and while I had been in the air, the NBA season had been canceled. The New York City public schools had shut down. And I was like, this is serious.
So did you turn around and come back?
No, my parents happened to be in Sarasota on vacation at the time. So I rented a car and I drove over to see them. They ended up extending their stay. So I was there in Florida for like 3.5 weeks, not working for the first time ever. And it felt like I was just watching the world burn down around me.
Right.
All of my friends were sick. Almost every single person I knew in New York City was sick.
Right.
Like really sick.
Right.
People were in the
No,
hospital.
it's devastating.
People my age were on ventilators. I just had nothing to do but read the news for like 5 or 6 hours a day. And I was literally losing my mind, let alone planning how I was going to run a business. And we got to April and my parents were like, you're not going back to New York. You're coming back to Fort Wayne. So I was like, okay, so I'll go back to Fort Wayne for a few weeks until things,
Until you figure out, right.
And it wasn't getting better. And the lease in my apartment was up at the end of May. And so I just decided I'm going to move my stuff into storage and then I'll go back at the end of the summer. And then I was like, no, I'm going to stay in Fort Wayne at least till the election so I can vote in Indiana. And you're still here. So that was sort of like the leaving Goldman situation.
So the pond is sort of taking this and bringing it to a reality?
Yeah, I think I started that marketplace concept. Originally was called Empower Us.
Okay.
It was a bad name and hard to remember and a lot of other problematic things. Wanting to, like you said, to bring business concepts to nonprofits.
Isn't it the same as like the affordable healthcare marketplace where people can go and shop for best health insurance for themselves, and then in some ways that was subsidized, but the idea of that. So is this the idea that a nonprofit, so they're looking for technology? Yeah. Okay. So this is just where you have all of their vendors and they can just go and shop and meet them?
Yeah, so that's what we started with. Okay. It was very much like the car shopping experience. Right. I chatted with some people about it in the spring and they're like, yeah, that sounds great. I would love to use that. Right. Please go build that. I hired 2 engineers. I was like, I'm not going to go raise money. I've got savings. So that's what this is for. Okay. So it's so obvious this is going to work. And I had vendors that already were willing to sponsor us because we had some, partnerships with nonprofit networks.
So you were providing these vendors with this quality of like the IT or COOs at these nonprofits.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so we launched in September with what you described, providing the shopping experience.
Right.
No one would use it.
Okay.
0, like complete flop, total failure. And
why do you think that is?
I had no idea. I mean,
really?
I sat in that failure for 2 months paralyzed. Okay. I didn't know what to do and thinking back on it, I think it's because I never actually failed before in my life.
But you didn't fail. When then they say, failure and then it's get back up, it's grit. But you really couldn't see why people wouldn't use it?
No, because I'd heard so many people tell me, you over-index on people affirming you.
Well, that's the first thing. Like why I don't believe in focus groups. And people lie even on surveys. Like when you ask them about their news consumption, they'll tell you how they think you want that they should be perceived of how they consume the news. Okay. But the other issue is that there are so many vendors out. I looked at this list that you have of all these. I've never heard of any of these tech vendors. Yeah. So I'm like, and I find this true with in the publishing space too, because the problem is that the main systems for a lot of publishing, they don't do certain things. So then you got to create a patch because you don't want to buy a whole new, system. So then you have to buy all these patches that allow you to do all these other things. And it's like, I'm like, I don't know what to buy. I don't know what do I need? And then you're like, I can't rebuild this whole thing. And so, but I've never heard of these companies. So, to me, that would be fundamental. One, that goes back to what Malcolm Gladwell says, that there's too many choices. So then you get stymied and you don't make any choices. Yep. But also it's, you need that. When you're dealing with your technology or something that is running your business, that is a relationship. Mm-hmm. I got to know. I'm not dealing with, on email. I need to know I can pick up the phone or I can text somebody and there's a problem and I'm going to trust that person because I'm trusting them with this important part of my business or company. Yep. So I think that would be something that was missing, and plus this, like I said, well, if you've never heard of these companies before, how do I know that they're really good? And so, okay.
Yeah.
So I could see the fundamentals of human psychology and behavior that would impact that.
Yeah.
So, okay, so then you took a step back and sort of said, okay, why isn't anyone using this?
Yeah.
And?
I think there were two primary problems. There's like the business functional problem, and then there's the me problems.
The me problems?
Yes,
You?
me, personally. Okay. I think I am very type A, if you haven't been able to tell. Someone a few weeks ago was like, you strike me as the person who probably got like really upset if you ever got a B on something. And I said, what's a B?
So are you in that perfection syndrome? Like if it's not perfect?
It is. I don't know that I hold myself accountable to perfection necessarily. I've never felt like perfectionist. But for me, I know when I've succeeded or doing well versus not.
Okay. And you judge it based on your own, you don't compare yourself to others, right?
I think it's impossible not to compare yourself to others some, but I do try to at least look at it for myself. And I think I was just coming to terms with the fact that I try to do everything on my own.
Right.
I try to solve problems on my own. I try to solve other people's problems on my own, right? And I got a call from one of the providers who had sponsored us. So this is now like early November. We're like 2 months in and struggling. And he's like, hey, what's going on? You got an update? Like there hasn't been any traffic.
Right.
And I had been avoiding these people, obviously, because I didn't know what to say or do. And I went straight into what I'd been trained to do best as an investment banker, which was smooth talk, right? Oh, it's early days still, and we've got some good signals, and we've got another announcement next week, and so
put some spin on
yeah.
it. Okay.
And it was just I was sort of nauseating myself with that like bullshit, if I can say that. I stopped and I just said, JD, it's not working. I don't know what to do, and I'm sorry. And he was silent for like 10 seconds, which was one of the longest 10 seconds of my life. And he said, I need you to stop focusing so much on your failure because you'll never see what you're doing right. And I knew this was going to be really hard. So let's think about it. And went right into brainstorming with me. And that was like a massive turning point. We didn't solve it right then and there. You never do. But for me, it was, wow, I need to learn how to ask for help.
Okay.
And realized I needed to create a space for other people to ask for help and not push help on them they didn't ask for.
Okay.
And recognizing all those market dynamics, which we can talk about,
Right.
like they're such small demand because of how they're funded and people's expectations,
Right.
and yet you've got hundreds of these companies that you don't know about
And they have funny names.
that
like,
want to solve.
They don't sound very, legitimate.
that want to solve their problems, and
Right.
you're like, they're not talking, they're
Right.
not meeting each other in the middle. What's missing?
Right.
And I think it's that assumption that people should go shopping and know what they need.
But they don't know what they need.
They don't know what they need, but they know what they know what problem they're trying to solve.
Yes.
And I think that's the credit we don't give enough to nonprofit leaders is everybody wants to tell them how to do their job. Everybody. And we started this talking about mansplaining as an example. And I heard so many people in the nonprofit sector feel like the business world is mansplaining to them.
Okay.
And so I realized my own arrogance and thinking like, oh, well, I was at Goldman Sachs and I worked with these big companies and I solved their problems and I'm just going to bring that to the nonprofit sector. When in reality, I think so much of what the nonprofit sector does needs to be better understood by the business world.
Well, they need to be looked at that they're businesses.
Yes, but I even think that comparison can be problematic because you're then saying like, be something other than what you are as a nonprofit, as an impact. So I like to use the term impact organization.
Okay, so an impact organization is defined as an organization that directly makes a difference?
Yeah, they're trying to, having an impact on the world, serving a mission.
Okay, but that's not just nonprofits. I mean, any media company could say that that's what they're trying to do. Education could say that they're an impact, right? So there's not just nonprofits in the field of impact companies. Okay, so you looked at that these are impact companies, and then what? So then you said they have different needs than other entities?
I said we need to make this simple and approachable so that they can literally just, when they create an account, they we don't tell them things that they need. They don't need to do the work to go search through a bunch of things. They can literally say their problem or their need, and we'll trust them to express it and how that's meaningful to them, and put the work on the vendors to go look at those listings from the nonprofit organizations and say, you have this problem, you need better donor management, you need a new fundraising tool. Or you don't feel like you're getting enough millennial donors, or like you have too many direct mail donations, and you want to move. So say it as a specific product need, say it as a strategic problem, but I'll leave it up to you to tell me the problem, and then put the work on the vendor of how they best approach that.
And that's what everybody always says, that you need to be, when you're you need to be the solution provider, where they're telling you their problem and then you help them.
So you're talking about relationships, and I couldn't agree more. And I think the way nonprofits shop today, or really, like you said, any business, any organization, the way that they shop today is calling friends, Googling, looking around, very time intensive, and also almost impossible to not feel like there's bias. Because your time and attention of using Google, and you start off with an example about the World Wide Web, yes, it was meant for free information exchange. That doesn't exist anymore. There is no free information exchange. You're being monetized everywhere you go. And so we said, like, okay, all these companies also use Google, Facebook, LinkedIn marketing. They're paying a lot of money for that to just learn everything about you and like pay someone else to get in front of you and not you. And that's where it comes down to the humanity of it all, of like the more like data tech connections that are just not connecting us, they're actually like pushing us farther apart.
Yes and no, but
Is like, so that company is paying all this money to try to get to you, and you are sort of turned off by that. Like, this ad's following me, or you're chasing me, and so it's not actually bringing you closer together. And I think by putting it in the nonprofit's terms, so they can create this listing, it can be anonymous, and we gather the interest from companies who are willing to pay for that because they are now not wasting their time with broad net marketing.
So you make your money by, they pay to have access to your network of nonprofits and their problems.
Yes, but that costs $120 per connection, and 100 of those dollars goes to the nonprofit.
To the nonprofit that has the problem.
Yes.
Okay.
So for every conversation, it's up to them. We aggregate those like interests so people can write messages. They only get that once a week. It is not constantly pinging them. They get one email a week. These 3 companies want to talk to you about your problem.
And do you vet all these companies before they can be on your pond, in your pond?
Yeah, so I know all of those companies well so far, and we're building out how we vet and evaluate more systematically as we want this to expand. And also having reviews along the way between providers and users. And
Pond is a nonprofit, right?
Pond is a benefit corporation.
And so what is a benefit corporation?
It is a for-profit with an explicit impact goal that drives their business decisions.
Is that a new type of corporation?
I think benefit corps have been around for at least 10 years, but like Tom's Shoes is a B Corp, Kickstarter is a B Corp.
And like, Bees, probably the
Burt's Bees. Yeah, so there's a lot of examples.
But it's pretty new, relative.
Yes, relatively new. And so that is really the idea is, we make money, but every time we make $1, a nonprofit gets $5 to invest in their tech.
So we really, believe it or not, we haven't really gotten into the whole issue of Pond and the bigger mission of Pond. So I do going to want to have you back because I need, I want to talk about that whole idea of this idea that you even talked about it, of making it more human and the humanity. So you have to promise me that we will set another date because I want to continue this, because I think also some of your insights, like I was saying to you before we started, might be more about how millennials think about business, and that they bring in so much of their personal beliefs into their business. Like that's not, there's no separation.
Right.
Like everybody talks about the work-life balance, which doesn't exist. But there's no, it's like your personal and your professional now, it's like
Totally.
all together. So you have to promise me that you will come back.
Tell me when.
Okay. But at the end of each And Good Company program, I ask guests the same 12 questions that French novelist Marcel Proust popularized from a Victorian parlor game.
Cool.
And they believe that they will reveal more about your true nature. So maybe when you also are starting conversations with people, you may also, in your list of your allies, you may define one of these questions. And you should know that so the first question is, what is your favorite word?
I think worth.
What is your least favorite word?
Profit.
What turns you on creatively, spiritually, or emotionally?
Human connection.
What turns you off creatively, spiritually, or emotionally?
Judgment.
What sound or noise do you love?
Water.
What sound or noise do you hate?
I don't know, so many things coming to mind. Just like just like screeching noises. I don't know.
What profession other than your own would you like to attempt?
Teacher.
What profession would you not like to do?
Banker.
You've already done that. What do you consider your greatest achievement?
My relationship with my parents.
Who, living or dead, would you most like to have a conversation with?
My uncle.
Is he no longer living?
No longer living. Passed away in 1994 from AIDS.
How would you like to die?
I guess I don't have a strong feeling about that. I don't have any control over it.
Okay. If heaven exists, what would you like to hear God say when you arrive at the pearly gates?
Someone's waiting for you.
Great. Well, thank you for this conversation. And you can learn more about And Good Company and all the other great conversations that we have had at andgoodcompany.info. We look forward to next week when we again invite you to enjoy a seat at the table for great conversation and good company.